Alright, so since the last video, I've only done two things. I went ahead and sprayed some black, just spray paint back up in there, just because once I weld all this up, I won't be able to get in there. And I cleaned it up with the wire brush and then painted over it just to keep the rust away. And then the other thing I did was I added a piece of metal under here. That is just to level it out, because when I was putting the leveler on here, there was a gap there, and rather than beating it up, because then it would have left an upward angle, because this is pretty sturdy, I just added a second piece of metal under there, which is going to fill that gap. And then I'll just weld it to there, and then weld this piece on top of it, and then at the end I'll just shave the excess off so it'll look all smooth. I'm probably going to go ahead and start sanding this coating off and then getting it tacked in place, and then we'll start getting this piece here cut out, getting it tacked, and then get this piece here cut out and tacked in place. Alright, so here we go. Alright, so now that I got the metal all cleaned up, let's go ahead and start welding. Alright, so there are the first 4 tacks. Pretty good. Now I'll go ahead and weld the whole thing up and then grind them down so I can get that piece of metal back on there flat. So there it is, pretty well welded. Got good heat to it. You can see the lines coming up off of it. Should hold up pretty good. I don't know if I'm gonna weld the bottom side yet. I probably should, but that's really overkill. But we'll see. I actually decided that I will weld the bottom side of this to that piece of metal when I'm under the car welding basically the whole floor pan. It'll just be easier and I can do it all at once then. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean all this up with the grinder so that the new piece of metal will lay flat on there. Eyes in the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you. nuts real tight on there, make it easier to weld. All right, let's go ahead and lay some tacks down. Alright, so I got the tacks on there. It's going to hold it in place, and now I will go ahead and weld basically the whole thing together. I'm going to make sure I try and jump around, because I definitely don't want this thing getting hot and warping, because I do want this thing to be flat for the floor pan. It's pretty important. So let's get started.
Eyes in the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you.
Alright, so there she is, pretty well welded. I was able to get some good beads on there, but there's only a few because I didn't want to heat the metal up too much, so I basically did more short ones. Over here, the metal wasn't exactly the cleanest, so they didn't turn out too good, but I'll just sand it down, and then we'll be good to go. Make it look all pretty, and then we'll put the leveler on there and see what it's like. Alright, well, hopefully you guys can see that. The leveler is laying on the piece of metal we just welded in, and that bubble is basically right between the lines. I mean, it's just barely touching the right line. Hopefully you can see that, but that is no big deal. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and move on to this section here. Cut out a square, go ahead and weld it in. And then there's it sanded down. Looks pretty good. Alright, so let's go ahead and try something here. I'm going to take this piece of paper towel. I would use cardboard, but I don't have any, but paper towels are handy. I'm going to try and use this paper towel and basically outline where I need to go ahead and make this cut. I'm going to try and, I was just going to cut a square, do this part here, and then cut this piece and do it, and then just weld it down the middle. I'm going to go ahead and try and keep it all one piece. Be a little harder measuring and cutting, but then I won't have to weld it twice as much. So let's go ahead and try this. Alright, so after the first test fit, it was too big, so I drew this line on here, and then I'm just about to cut this bottom part out. Alright, so after trimming a few more pieces off, there it is. Yes, I did want it to come over further because the metal behind this was a little rusty, so it was probably going to blow through, so I wanted some extra metal hanging off so I could weld this piece to it. And then it was too hard trying to get the metal to fit up in there, so I'm going to go ahead and start working on fabricating a piece to fit right in there right now. Okay, so it's not the prettiest job, but I got this piece cut out here. Let me get it put in there for you. Alright, it keeps sliding around, but I got a piece cut out to fit in there. It slid down a little bit, so it's definitely going to fill up that gap over there. But that's all covered up now. Time to go ahead and start prepping the metal to start welding it. Alright, so the metal is clean and it's clamped in place. Now I can go ahead and start putting some tack welds on it. And then go ahead and put this piece in there and get some tacks on that as well. Blowing a few holes right there. That's okay. I'll get them filled in. Look at that bead right there. Hopefully the camera can focus and do it justice. But that's one spot where I had two really good pieces of metal, so I was able to do a pretty long bead there. It's not easy getting into all these places trying to weld this up, so I mean, it's not all going to be pretty. Alright, so I finally got that little piece in there. It took me forever because I accidentally dropped it behind there and I had to try and fish it out. But I just laid the first tack on it, and then now I'm going to go ahead and weld it all up. Alright, so I just got done welding it up, and there it is. I know it ain't pretty, but I haven't cleaned it up at all. There's a lot of slag and discoloration at the moment. I was dealing with a lot of blowing holes. The metal was just pretty thin. Did the best I could. It doesn't have to be pretty for it to hold. And if you remember, there was a really big hole here that I probably should have put some metal or a circle in there, but I just went ahead and filled it up with weld. Just kept building the welds off of each other and then just linked them together. There was no reason to cut a square piece of metal or a circle and just put it in there. So I just filled it up. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get a piece cut for this little hole here, and I think I'm going to put it on from the back side, make it look a little nicer there. Alright, here we go. Alright, so I've got this old piece of galvanized steel. It may look familiar. It's actually part of the floor pan, part of the metal that came from the floor pan. This was from the other side, some of the excess that I cut off, so I'm just going to go ahead and reuse it. Got my line drawn and I'll get it cut out. Okay, there it is welded in. I didn't waste my time welding it completely shut, so I just did little beads everywhere. There's no reason to weld it completely shut. I'm just going to use seam sealer on it. That piece wasn't structural, it was literally just filling a gap, so I'll just use seam sealer on the top and the bottom, and then it'll be good to go. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get the grinder out, sand it down, and we'll see how it looks from there. All right, so here it is after a little bit of sanding. Looks pretty good. You're not gonna see all that once the seam sealer's on it and it's painted. I mean, it's not going anywhere. Here, I mean, I'm using quite a bit of strength, and this thing ain't moving. So it's in there, and the floor pan is just going to be able to rest on this, and then it'll have a good place for it to weld onto. Well, I'm glad you stayed tuned to the end of this video. I hope you give a like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more. See you later.